Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing another book review, and this time I'm going to be covering Nona the Ninth. So before we get into spoilers, let's go over a little synopses. So Nona the Ninth is the third book in a sci-fi installation. I say sci-fi, but it's really a sci-fi fantasy, and this is an adult novel. The first book, Gideon of the Ninth, is following a young woman who desires to get off the planet that she is basically imprisoned on, but she's suckered into doing one last job for her ruler, who is the regent daughter Harrowhark, as she travels to another planet to become a lector. The first book is very gothic, has that like mysterious castle vibe, and it also involves like a murder mystery. And it was a book unlike anything I had ever read. It was something I really enjoyed, but was also very confused reading. But surprisingly, I continued on in the series to Harrowhark, which again, a very confusing ride, but I still enjoyed it. And now we have Nona, which again, confusing ride in some respects, but I still really enjoyed it. So I would say this is my least favorite in the series so far, but I still gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I still really enjoyed it. And I would say this is for fans of sci-fi fantasy who like character-driven series where the characters are sometimes emotionally constipated, for readers who like to not understand what's going on and trying to figure things out as they go, who like to do multiple rereads possibly. I'm a pleb. I don't overanalyze and read this multiple times. I feel like I should now because I'm learning that there's a community of people who do that, which really makes sense to me. But as someone who just goes through one time reading around, I do feel like I'm missing things. I'm enjoying it still, but I do think I'm missing things. I do feel like I will reread this series at some point, but if you're someone who really likes to dig in, do multiple rereads, this might be the perfect book for you to pick up. And before we get into the spoileries of this book, just a warning for the series in general. I would definitely look up content and trigger warnings, but some of the ones that I notice continually through the series is body possession, fantasy violence and gore, war themes of death, and because they're necromancers, there's the use of dead bodies and bones and stuff. So if that's not something you're comfortable with, you're probably not going to enjoy the series. It's not the most gory series I've read, but there are some very like jarring, gory moments. And for this book in particular, if you are sensitive to imagery or scenes of crowd crush, you will definitely be uncomfortable in a certain section of this book. So my kind of like one sentence summary thoughts on the series is that I'm just so fascinated by the fact that this series keeps me so confused and yet so enthralled. Like I feel like I'm sort of getting the hang of things. I'm sort of understanding everything that's going on, but the reading process in some ways is very confusing and all over the place. And yet, again, I'm still really enjoying that process. I'm still really enjoying the world, and I'm really fallen for our two main characters, Gideon and Harrowhark, who don't always appear that much in the series. Gideon is barely in the second book, and Nona and Gideon both are barely in the third book, and yet I still really deeply care for them. So let's kind of go over a very brief summary of this book to kind of sum up what I think happened. I think this book, plot-wise at least, I feel like I did understand what it was going on for the most part, and I will get into the reasons why of that. So let's go over a brief summary and then we'll get into more detail by detail moments. So Nona the Ninth is the third book in the Locked Tomb series, as I've said. This is 3 of 4 books. So this is the book prepping up to the final book. In this book, we follow a new character named Nona, who is a mysterious new person that we've never met before. We don't know her. All we find out basically is that she's in the body of a 19-year-old. We assume it's Harrowhark's body. We don't know if this is Harrowhark or not, because Nona has no recollection of her memories, does not remember anything. And it's basically about Nona trying to survive in this desolate city, which is almost like a post-apocalyptic sci-fi planet city that has been used as like a way stop for groups of refugees. And in this city, she's kind of living with this makeshift family, which is made up of Cam/Sextus and then Pyrrha. And through her eyes, we are slowly learning what is going on and Nona's connections to the past as well as past installments in the series. All the while, this is getting interspersed who we assume to be and later learn as Harrowhark talking to John in the river about his past life and how he came into necromancy and how the world was kind of formed. So let's go like kind of scene by scene-ish. So we start off the book with Nona living with Cam/Sextus and then Pyrrha. Cam and Sextus are in one body, are sharing the body, swapping off. Cam and Pyrrha have definitely something going on, as well as Sextus and Pyrrha a little bit. And Cam and Sextus are both literally and figuratively inseparable from each other, which kind of makes sense for this weird like throuple situation that's going on. I would say Cam and Sextus to me read as more platonic. I think they do kiss at the end of the book, but to me their relationship is much more platonic, but they're sharing one body. They've always been very close to each other and very loyal to each other, and they are kind of in love with the same person. Again, it seems like Sextus and Pyrrha have something going on, which to me Pyrrha read as very much like a lesbian, so maybe she's okay with Sextus because Sextus is now inhabiting Cam's body. This novel does some really interesting stuff with the body possession in terms of like gender and stuff, so I don't know. There's a lot going on. So basically Cam, Sextus, and Pyrrha are studying Nona. I would say Sextus the most so is studying Nona because they don't know who she is. They have inklings, ideas, theories, but they don't know for sure who Nona is. And Nona herself doesn't know because she has no memory of her past. So Nona is going to school. She's basically a teacher's aide to like a class of students who are anywhere between the ages of like preschool upwards to like 13, 14. And Nona fits right in because her body is so small and shrunken. She basically looks like a 13, 14-year-old even though she's 19. And of course she's acting almost like a precocious child because she has no recollections. She's basically at like a level of like a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old. Like she really does not understand what's going on. So on this planet there's just a lot of desolation, murderings, riots. It's just very, very bad. Almost like post-apocalyptic bad. And the kind of struggle that we're seeing through Nona's eyes is that there's the group, what is it, the House of God, the Eye of God, whatever the God group is, who have some familiar faces as a part of their team now, versus the 9 houses. Nona's group, Found Family, is not really with either group. They're kind of being controlled / watched by the House of God, Eyes of God. I'm really forgetting that name for a minute. But it seems like they're not entirely divorced from the 9 houses and their kind of connection to them. It seems like, especially Sextus wants to save the 6th house. They just don't necessarily like John, and they're against John, if that makes sense. The 9 houses and John are really only concerned about the resurrection beast, and House of God, Eye of God is like not a priority as much to them, but they're still in this like antagonistic relationship. So like I said, we learn a lot about John's past and how necromancy came to be. We learn that it's connected to our world. Like this happened in like slightly futuristic from present day time period of how John discovered necromancy and how it came about. And so basically we can assume that we are thousands and thousands of years into the future, but it is like connected to our world. So basically there are negotiations between Nona's team and the 2 different groups. At some point John comes down to take over the planet for the 9 houses, and we know that the 6th house is displaced and being held somewhere on this planet, which makes me believe that this was the planet the 6th house was originally housed on. It got taken over by the Eye of God. All the previous inhabitants were kind of collected up. Necromancy is of course illegal on this planet and seen as like a really bad thing. And then from there, a lot of immigrants were transported onto this planet, and now they're living there trying to find ways off of this planet and find ways to better planets. At some point, there is like chaos and a coup after John like announces himself taking over the planet, and our little Found Family, their goal is to escape from that and to also save the 6th house. Cam and Sextus form together to form a new person called Paul, and they believe that this kind of both self-sacrificing into a new spirit is the perfect way to become a lictor. So far we've seen people that have not quite become lictors like Harrowhark because they haven't quite fully committed to getting rid of one of the souls. We've seen the imperfect lictors, which kills off one of the souls, keeps one of them more powerful, and then we've seen the perfect lictor of John, who has figured out a way to keep both lictor and cavalier alive, but also kills off millions and millions of people and destroys a whole planet and creates a horrible monster beast. So far it seems like Cam and Sextus is the way to go. By sacrificing both their souls, they create a new soul. They possibly might have the same powers as a lictor. They are also reunited with Gideon, who is like the dead possessed body of Gideon. It seems to have some of the personality of Gideon, but at some point we learn that John has figured out a way or figured out the soul. So I'm guessing that this is a different soul inside Gideon's body, or like some type of copycat soul. So it's not actually the soul in Gideon's body, because we know that the soul of Gideon is in Harrowhark still, or at least tied with Harrowhark's soul. So we're reunited with Gideon, who is now like the son heir of John, and who also goes by Killian, I think. Gideon and Ianthe are kind of like besties now, and so like there's this whole double cross, triple cross thing when they all meet up together. Coronabeth is on the Eyes of God side and has like a double cross, triple cross thing with her sister as well, who of course is with the 9 houses still. But the 6th house is saved. They get past Ianthium and are able to travel through the river to the 9th house, open the tomb where where they think Nona is. So at this point we learn that Alecto's soul, who is the soul of the earth, or like the cavalier that John created from all the dead souls of the earth when he like did that whole process of becoming Elector. Alecto's soul is inside Nona and has lost all her memories and does not know what's going on. Nona is inside the body of Alecto in the tomb where possibly Gideon might also be. When they meet up with Gideon, they are hoping that Nona's soul will come out and Gideon's soul will transfer back to her own body. But of course that doesn't happen because it's not Harrowhark in the body, it's Alecto. And so that's kind of where we end the book. There's parts I'm fuzzy on. I feel like this series is very much just vibes, so like I kind of get what's going on, even if I can't really articulate it very well. But at this point we end the book and, you know, we're hoping that Harrowhark goes into her body, we're hoping Gideon goes back into her body, and at this point the goal is what? To defeat John, to save the houses, to beat or negotiate with the Eyes of God group, and to kill the resurrection beasts, or at least tame Alecto so that whole situation with the awful beasts that are chasing them comes down. It's gonna be some type of amalgamation of that. So this book, as I've described, it's really different from everything else that we've seen in the series, but this very much felt like a bridge book. There's some events that take place near the end of the book, but relatively this feels like it's setting up for the finale, and for me, normally that's an issue, but I didn't really mind it here. This book really feels like a departure from the main series, both in plot and tone. We don't have our lesbians with swords, we don't have our cold as ice necromancers, we're with unknown characters and side characters, and instead of a very plot heavy book, we are going on like this emotional journey with this unknown character who's basically childlike. The thing that is really familiar while reading this book though is we are with a character who is misunderstanding, doesn't understand what's going on, and we as the reader slowly have to piece that story together. That has been like a consistent kind of thread or writing style this author has adopted through the series. Nona felt the most interesting of those characters to view from because she is such a passive character and everything is kind of passively happening around her, so that is very fascinating. So the fumbling of information was just really interesting in this book because we are through like a observer's perspective. But I would say this is also the least confusing in the books because so much isn't happening. It's almost like a catch-up book. We're catching up on information, we're getting backstories, we're slowly piecing together things that we've had questions about from the past. Instead of with a heavy plot, it's all tied together with this weird like slice of life, found family kind of more story in this like a post-apocalyptic type desolate society world. So it's a very weird book, which they're all really weird books, but this is such a weird departure from the series. I somehow didn't find it dull. I was really enjoying just watching Nona's story unfold. Most of it takes place in like a school setting where she's just hanging out with like little kids or like a dog named Noodle. She's a character who can't comprehend, again, who's passive, so she's just like watching everything and misunderstanding things, and we're kind of having to interpret what actually is going on. And again, it is very middle book feeling. I think a lot of people will not enjoy this book. People are gonna slog through it. I could totally see people slogging through this, not enjoying it because it's such a departure, because it feels so much like a bridge book, but don't know, I enjoyed it. I was at the right place where this kind of weird slice of life story really worked for me. What I think is so interesting is that Nona is basically the opposite of Harrowhark in every way. She announces what she wants, especially in terms of love. She announces it, she asks for it, and she receives it, which even though it isn't Harrowhark, or we learn that it's Harrowhark later on, it's just such a weird thing to see those words coming out of Harrowhark's body and for her to be like receiving that kind of care and attention. This series is like very not soft, so to have such a soft book almost is just very bizarre. I mean, this book in general isn't really like soft, but it feels soft in comparison, so it's just a very weird departure for the series because the characters are actually like admitting things and caring about each other. I don't know, it's very strange. So this book, yeah, it's just a really weird bridge book where we're getting like a softer story, we're getting to play catch up, we're actually getting to learn information and understand things for the first time, and I enjoyed it. I can see why people would not like it, who would think that it was not a necessary addition to the series. So let's look at the series as a whole. So Gideon the Ninth is really interesting because Gideon does not care / understand necromancy. Harrow the Ninth as a book is a character who does not understand what's going on / going insane / is confused about what's a hallucination or not, while Nona is a character who has a childlike understanding of the world, has no memory, and is misunderstanding every situation that she is placed in. So for all three books, we're in these very odd perspectives where the characters are not understanding the world around them or are confused in some some way and are misinterpreting information around them. So all the POVs are new to us every single time, the setting is always new to us, and all the narrators are somewhat unreliable in some way. So we're trying to understand the story from these like very skewed POVs, and it always feels like the book is a new start in the series because we're starting with a new character, we're starting with a new set of rules almost, and the place and setting is always new too. The first book mainly takes place in like a gothic castle with like these kind of necromancy labs that feel very like grotesque-y, labby, video gamey-esque, like you would think of like a horror game. And that story is like a murder mystery slash fight for your life kind of adventure sci-fi ebook. While Harrowheart is like deep in space on a spaceship, but again has that like kind of gothic-y feel to it. It's all about fighting the big bad, but it's also Harrowheart fighting for her life again. But it's also like a giant mindfuck because we have no idea what's going on and we don't know who to trust, and we can't trust our narrator because she has no idea what's going on because she's hallucinating or possibly hallucinating. While Nona is like a slice of life backstory type book with like a post-apocalyptic city. So there's always a new tone, there's always a new setting, always a new character. Everything is always new with these books, and we're always in the perspective of somebody who doesn't quite understand. We as the reader are kind of forced to put everything together to slowly make sense of everything. I feel like if you put the story out in a linear way and didn't explain it from the POVs and just kind of explain the plot of the story, it would seem almost conventional. Like there's a big bad, there's a godlike person to defeat. There's a lot of things that don't sound that dissimilar from a lot of fantasy and sci-fi books that are out there, but what makes it unconventional, I believe, is the perspective. It comes from the way that Tasmsyn Muir decides to tell her story. We as readers have to work for it, which not everybody's going to like, but like that is what's making this series unique. We are always placed in a perspective that is fresh, that is confused in some way, but the story is always told in a very particular way based on the character's perspective. It makes the conventional unconventional because that's what this series feels like. It just feels very unconventional because of the storytelling style. Every book feels like it's starting over in the series. It's really weird. It feels like it shouldn't work, and maybe it doesn't work for some readers, but it really works for me. It makes the series feel very strange, very odd, but also just original and fresh. So like Nona is not my favorite in the series, but I still like really enjoyed it for this aspect. It just felt really fresh, both as a story and for the series in general. And it's really interesting because like I feel like I'm finally at the point where I'm not just anticipating the next book, but I actually feel like I understand. Like I feel like I pieced enough together that I actually can understand and can kind of not guess, but I can see what is going to happen. I feel like the fourth book is going to conclude in a satisfying way where I wasn't so sure about it in the second book. I don't know who's going to be telling the story from the fourth book, if it's going to be multiple POV for the first time. I just don't know what's going to happen, but it does finally feel like the strings of the story are coming together, and I feel like it is going to be satisfying. So at this point, I don't need to tell you to read the series. You're probably already readers of this series, or you're just someone who enjoys spoilers or who wasn't planning to read the series, but I can say that this series, it is bizarre, but it's also unlike anything I've read in a good way. I want to get deeper into this series. I want to reread it. I want to be with everybody, having theories, understanding like the deeper complexities of things that I missed. But I'm just so enthralled about how captivating and wonderful this series is, despite it doing things that honestly like shouldn't work from a writer perspective. Tasmsyn Muir just has a really clear vision of what this story is, and I just really appreciate that because ideas and execution are not always compatible with each other, but Tasmsyn Muir is able to execute what she's imagining, I think at least. But yeah, those are my thoughts on Nona and the series as a whole. I'm eager to see what others think. I would love to know what you thought about this book if you've read it. If I've somehow convinced you to read the series, sure, come along for the ride. Even though I explained everything, honestly, like this series is so much and so confusing. I don't know if it would actually be a spoiler or not, but thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys later, and happy reading.